we're releasing the 2024 Summer Reliability Assessment. And I won't go into too many details and save those for Mark, who will kind of go through the details of the report and some of our findings. But I do want to set the table around some of the reliability risks we're seeing in general. If you look over the past couple of years, we're retiring more and more conventional resources, and we're replacing them with a generous amount of solar and wind resources. What we're really seeing is a transformation of our system, but also the types of risks. And as we address one risk, other risks pop up. And as we bring on more wind and solar, certain risks need to be mitigated and addressed. As we also retire resources, we need to think about some of the essential reliability services that we've traditionally received from resources like spinning resources, like your coal and steam and gas turbines. We're seeing a changing use of those resources. And because of that, we just have to think about the new risks that need to be addressed with our new system. Over a couple past winters, we've seen some challenges to meeting electricity demand. And over the past couple of years, we've addressed some of those risks by employing more standards around winterization and more energy assessments within our planning. But when we look to the summer, different risks are emerging. And while we discuss those, one of the things that is absolutely visible, not only today, but looking into the future, is that we're relying more than ever on our neighbors. And so areas, as their risk profiles are changing, as they're changing out their resources, as the weather patterns they're seeing changes, we're more reliant on our neighbors than we really ever have. And so we really need to take, and that's really why we conduct these assessments, is to really provide an overall picture of reliability and understand how all the areas can meet reliability under these conditions that we're faced with. So that kind of setting the table around the current risk profile of the system. The summer assessment helps us look into the next couple months. In a couple weeks here, we'll release our state of reliability report, which looks at historical trends and kind of see the trends of the system and how those trends are changing. And then later this year, we'll put out a long-term assessment that evaluates the long-term reliability, 10-year long-term reliability. In addition, this year, we're releasing our interregional transfer study, a congressionally mandated assessment that will look at the interregional transfer capability and also make recommendations for prudent additions to that transfer capability. And that'll be released later this year. And that's, again, an essential component to the overall picture when we're thinking about reliability, resilience, and more reliance on our neighbors and the resources they might have to meet reliability needs. So those are kind of a suite of our assessments, setting the table around the risks and kind of what NERC, what the ERO look at from an assessment perspective. I'll turn it over here to Mark Olson, who manages the reliability assessment part of the organization. So Mark, please go ahead and please review the summer assessment findings.
Very good. Thank you, John. We'll go ahead to the next slide and jump right into this. I'll give an overview and talk about some of the key themes through our assessment and how we've gone about assessing the risk. And then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end. So just some of the key takeaways that you'll find in our report. All of our assessment areas have adequate resources for normal summer peak load conditions. As we'll see here in a minute, there's been a lot of new resource additions, a lot of solar came on the system, and we've had more capacity stick around in some areas that were of concern in the past, and that has helped. Making sure that has helped to enable all areas to have normal resources for normal peak conditions as demand is growing. There's also been more demand-side management program enrollment in many of the assessment areas. So more resources available to the operators to manage demand. However, as in the past, we note that there is the potential for extreme temperatures across much of North America, and that's a cause for concern for grid reliability this summer. A large part of North America could be at risk of supply shortfalls during heat waves and extreme summer conditions that can affect generation or wind output or the transmission systems. Demand is growing. There is, in many areas, it is growing at a rapid pace, and that is putting pressure on resource adequacy and on the transmission system. There are some concerns for system adequacy. That's part of our risk assessment of what's being fueled by the demand growth. And then a last key takeaway is that supply chain issues have affected resource additions and resulted in less added capacity for this summer than was projected in the last LTRA. Projects that can benefit summer reliability should be carefully monitored. That's a message we have for the industry, and a note that supply chain issues continue to be a challenge with summer preparations. Go to the next slide, and we'll have a kind of an overview of the weather conditions that could be expected. What we see from the weather services is that our electric grid operators should prepare for another potentially difficult summer. Weather services in the U.S. and Canada are warning that challenging heat conditions could be in store for North America again this summer. And that underscores the need for operators to be prepared for above normal demand and the resource challenges that can come with high heat. Also, looking at drought conditions, the North American Drought Monitor shows improved conditions for much of North America compared to last summer, but moderate and extreme drought persists across much of Canada and in the U.S. Southwest. And drought can affect summer resource adequacy and bulk power system reliability by contributing to high temperatures in wide areas. It also elevates wildfire risk, which can affect transmission, and of course, drought can affect hydroelectric output. I would note that last summer brought record temperatures and extended heat waves and even wildfires to parts of North America. And the operators at the balancing authorities and reliability coordinators and transmission operators, they face significant challenges and were highly effective in maintaining reliability. Additionally, last summer, load serving entities and administration officials in many parts of North America used public appeals to lower customer demand during periods of strained supplies. So for this summer, operators should review lessons and the experience that they had from prior summer and incorporate those insights into their seasonal operations planning. Next slide. So we'll look at how the demand has changed from last year. Demand is growing in most areas, and some areas with large increases in peak demand forecasts for this year could face challenges in meeting reserves. There's a very clear signal of demand growth. It's not uniform everywhere. It grows at varying rates. I'll note that in Texas at ERCOT and the Southwest Power Pool and in British Columbia province, increases in peak demand forecasts are among the highest of all the areas, and they also build on similar growth from last year, so quite a bit of growth occurring year over year. Drivers for demand growth in the areas vary. It can include demographic changes and economic activity, but also new data centers and cryptocurrency mining facilities in some areas are contributing higher demand forecasts. I'll note that in ERCOT, where some of the most data center and crypto mining development is occurring, some of these large loads participate in demand-side management programs that can help offset their impact. Next slide. So this chart is showing the reserve margin changes. That's showing you what the peak resources in comparison to peak demand levels are. We see that resource additions in many of the assessment areas that were identified as at risk in last year's SRA have outpaced rising demand forecasts, and that's reflected in higher on-peak reserve margins. A couple of notable things here in the Southwest Power Pool. There's been significant additional wind resources, and they've added some capacity they're able to count this year from generators that in the past have been able to serve 2 different areas. Those are now qualifying as resources in Southwest Power Pool because of the commitments they're making. And so that adds to resource capacity in Southwest Power Pool and helps meet demand for this coming year. Ontario is not a risk area for this year, but last year it was one. Ontario has fewer nuclear units that are out for their scheduled refurbishment programs this summer, and that's helped increase their capacity. In addition, they've got more firm import commitments from the province of neighboring Quebec. So as John noted before, this is a theme in some areas where firm import agreements are being established with neighbors in showing that increased reliance on our neighbors. In the southeast here, the central part of CERC, they also have increased imports from neighbors in the way of firm imports. So that's counted as committed capacity for the upcoming summer, as well as there's new solar resources and some gas generation that is online for the summer that they didn't have last year. And then finally, out in the U.S. Western interconnection, there's been significant solar additions in the interconnection, as well as a lot of battery capacity online or coming online in California. And we're going to look at that in the next slide. But it's important to note the hydro outlook in California is much improved as a result of winter precipitation and snowpack. And when the hydro is strong in California, that can help as providing hydro to balance the variability in wind and solar resources and really improve their reliability for the summer. Next slide. We mentioned that solar resources have increased. Really, it's been a record increase in solar across the bulk power system since last summer. There's 25 gigawatts in new solar capacity that is connected to the bulk power system. Last summer was also a big year for solar additions, but it was 19 gigawatts then, up to 25 gigawatts in nameplate solar capacity. That is the rated capacity of the resources, and I'm showing here on this slide 5 of the assessment areas that have had the most significant increases in solar capacity from last year. Now, nameplate capacity is what the solar plant is rated at. We project that that will provide about 10 gigawatts of on-peak resource capacity or peak demand resource capacity. So that's what the resource is likely to provide when you account for variability in weather, cloud cover, and also the time of peak demand, because peak demand may not align with the peak output times for solar. So about 10 gigawatts of additional on-peak capacity coming from solar resources across the BPS this year. And I noted that batteries have been added in some areas. Really significant amounts of battery in ERCOT and California, the California-Mexico assessment area. These areas have a lot of solar resources, and so the battery are particularly important resources capable of helping manage the variation. And as the solar ramps down in the late afternoon and early evening, but demand is still high, the batteries really help provide for energy to meet demand during those hours. Next slide, please. So our slide here shows you our risk assessment map, and the details for each assessment area are covered in their report. I'll touch on them briefly here, but as mentioned before, extreme temperatures are cause for concern and could lead to reserve shortfalls in our elevated risk areas highlighted here. There are no high risk areas, meaning that all of our assessment areas are meeting their resource adequacy criteria and are expected to have sufficient resources to meet a normal peak demand, even when you account for normal outages of resources. The things we consider in making the assessment are we examine those on-peak reserve margins, which we saw in an earlier slide, but we also look at more extreme conditions specifically. We'll do that by looking at operational risk analysis, performing some risk scenarios of what could happen if you saw the once per decade type of heating, what that would do to demand, or what will happen if those low hydro or low wind conditions were to occur. So we perform that through our waterfall chart analysis in the report. And also all of our assessment areas are performing an all hours probabilistic risk assessment. Some of the approaches do vary, but we've documented those. But those are also useful in examining risk periods that occur away from the peak hour, and also looking at more extreme scenarios involving demand or resources. Our elevated risk areas are areas that we assess as having risk of supply shortfall under an event that is on the caliber of a once per decade heat wave, and how that can affect demand and resources. To quickly talk about those, we'll talk about the mid-continent here first. MISO, they've had resource additions since last year, but they're offset by generator retirements, fewer imports than last year, and also a higher reserve requirement needed to maintain reliability. Like last year, wind generator performance is really the key factor in MISO in its ability to meet reserves during high demand periods. If wind output is projected to be low, resources will be very tight, and they'll can face challenges. In the province of Saskatchewan, Sask Power, their concern there is if they have high generator outages, abnormally high outages of their thermal fleet can lead to reserve shortfalls at peak demand. In New England, recent retirements of plants at Mystic have reduced the available capacity. That makes the area more reliant on external transfers during tight conditions. In Texas, the ERCOT system, significant load growth from last year is straining parts of the transmission network, and they've led the areas in adding solar resources, and that helps serve peak demand, but it causes some of those energy risks to shift, and we'll look at that on a slide here in just a second, what that looks like. In the province of British Columbia, demand growth again is playing a factor here, but also that long-term long-term drought that's happening up there could pose a threat to hydro generation under extreme conditions. And so a wide area heat event could lead to a challenge if they can't get enough imports or if the hydro output is low. In the California-Mexico assessment area, continue to have concerns that a wide area heat event can risk reserves there. A wide area heat event that threatens the supply external to CAMX puts imports at risk as a potential concern. There are a lot of battery resources still being added to the system, and if those come into place before the peak periods in the late summer, the condition is significantly improved in the CAMX assessment area. And the last area is in the U.S. Southwest. Because of demand growth and those ongoing drought conditions, electricity supplies could be strained under extreme heat that affects the ability for transfers to happen. Next slide. We're going to talk about what energy risks are, and just this is a depiction of the ERCOT risk day in ERCOT. As we said, all areas have adequate resources, but energy risks emerge in areas that do not have enough dispatchable generators or dispatchable resources to counter periods when solar, wind, or hydro output are low. And so what this slide is showing is results of ERCOT's probabilistic reserve risk model, which is part of their seasonal assessment process. It's developed, and what the simulation shows is an elevated risk of having to declare energy emergency alerts during evening hours on the peak load day in August, which is their forecasted summer peak load month. The risk can reach up to 18% likelihood of an energy emergency alert during the highest risk period of the day, which are those later hours from 8 p.m. Through 10 p.m. As the solar generation output is reaching a low level. You see, earlier during the day, when the solar is providing, there's very little risk of shortfall. Okay, next slide. So just a couple of other reliability issues for the upcoming summer. Unexpected tripping of solar resources continues to be, solar resources and battery resources during grid disturbances is an ongoing concern. These are inverter-based resources. They respond differently to grid disturbances, and there's been problems with ride-through in the past, leading to large amounts of solar to drop offline. And now that is extended to battery resources as well, could be affected by that. So something for operators to be aware of, but it's important that our generator owners pay attention to settings and take action according to a NERC alert. Also note the importance of natural gas fuel availability for our electricity generation. We do not foresee any problems for the upcoming summer. There's high levels of storage in the natural gas stores. What needs to be stressed with both grid and gas system operators is the importance of coordination for maintenance periods on the gas system, so that we can ensure fuel availability to the gas-fired generation. And then lastly, supply chain and construction delays can affect summer preparations and new resource additions, and that it could exacerbate reliability challenges or challenges for the operators to deal with when things are delayed. Next slide. So lastly, I'll talk about our recommendations in the report. Operators in the risk areas should review their plans for resolving supply shortfalls and implement conservative operating procedures well in advance of approaching weather systems. Also, we encourage operators and the load serving entities to review and coordinate their procedures for implementing demand side management programs. Generator owners with solar PV resources and battery resources should implement our NERC alert, which was issued last year. Includes recommendations for the generator owners to adjust the settings that would support the resources riding through disturbances better, and do that in consultation with the equipment manufacturers. And then lastly, state regulators and industry should prepare for managing emergent requests for air quality restriction waivers during tight grid conditions. I think we're ready for next slide, which would be for questions. So